Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Braver by the Day podcast. Josh here from Australia. For today's show notes, go to braverbytheday.com/21. That's braverbytheday.com/21. Today is part one of a two-part series. I had the chance to interview the amazing Elsie Escobar, aka Yo Geek on Twitter. She's also the host of Libsyn's The Feed podcast. Libsyn being a big audio host, I actually use them to host this show, as I mentioned quickly in the episode. The first half of the conversation, we basically dive into the background on Elsie's experiences with yoga, how she got into the art, and a little bit about her own thoughts about yoga and how it applies to the physical body. And we approach that from obviously the aspect of habit change and making a physical change, which can lead to other changes in your life. So I hope you enjoy part one. Part two will be the very next episode. So just before we jump into today's episode, I just wanted to thank our co-sponsor, Audible. Audible's amazing. It's where I get all my audiobooks from. Plays on all kinds of devices. For today, if you wanted to get a free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Australia. And today's recommendation is Do the Work by Stephen Pressfield. He reads it himself. It's very quick. It can apply to anything from yoga to writing a book to losing weight to making a movie, working out, going for a job, changing careers, anything like that. It's really a great book. And as I mentioned, Stephen Pressfield reads the book himself, and he has an interesting voice and a great inflection. So audibletrial.com/Australia. Thanks to Audible for sponsoring the show, and we'll jump in with part one of my conversation with Elsie Escobar. So I'm here with Elsie Escobar from Elsie's Yoga Cooler and yogeek.com. Elsie's also the community manager of Libsyn, who is an online media host and distribution company that I actually use for this very podcast. So today we're probably going to be talking more about the yoga based stuff that Elsie does in her 9-to-5 job, I guess, that she owns a studio and teaches people and all that sort of stuff. And she's obviously got the handle Yo Geek, so we'll probably be talking about the geeky side of yoga as well, hopefully, I'm assuming. So take it away, Elsie, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into yoga, and maybe how that kind of segued into your other role as the Libsyn community manager, because that's kind of a bit of a shift there. So
Yeah, it is. It's a little bit of a crazy story. There's two different things that kind of intersect with one another. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. I so appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. So
I started, I've always been a physical person. I've always been, very aware of fitness, very aware of food intake and things like that. I started off when I was in high school. I basically started to kind of teach myself about nutrition and muscles and things like that just by reading, fitness magazines like Shape magazine when I was like in my teens. And I was always a part of sports. I played all kinds of sports when I was in high school. So I was always very physical about that. I also happened to have started doing a little bit of acting when I was in high school as well, not by choice, but because I ended up we have something called electives here in the United States, or at least when I was in school, they had electives, which is, you have your regular classes and then you have like all those like the studies that are in the fringes, like arts and different kinds of languages and stuff like that, that doesn't really necessarily play into the science and math and, like grammar things that are part of the curriculum. And one of the electives that I had chosen did not pan out, and therefore I had like my third or fourth choice, which was drama. So I got shoved into this drama class that I was totally scared to be in. But it turns out that I ended up doing very well in the class, even though I was very, very nervous and very, very scared. So I ended up taking a theater major when I went into school to get my studies at the university, as I never wanted to commit. So I used it as like sort of like a leverage point that it was easier for me to get into school as a drama major than as something else. So, it was kind of crazy. But and then in school, I still started to I continued to work out and be very physical. It was always a big, huge part of who I was. So kind of skip over my university, and I know this is all going to come back around, but skip through the 4 years of grads of a university that we had. I ended up following again into the theater career because I got into a master's program that was super unexpected, which was only accepting 8 students a year, 3 of them women, 5 of them men. And I obviously did not think that this was going to be happening with me, but I had applied to this program because this is where it all comes together. They offered yoga as part of the curriculum. I had never done yoga before. I just thought, very interesting. This grad school program is offering yoga as part of their thing. How neat is that? I want to apply for that. So I had nothing to do with the studies. It had only to do with the yoga. And it was bizarre because it was one of the best programs in the country, and I happened to get in, which was, again, super crazy. So I started to practice yoga as sort of like a warm-up for being on stage. And the teacher was a ballet teacher who taught us our yoga class. And she didn't really get into the yoga itself too much. She just kind of gave us some of the sun salutations, which are some of the poses that are linked via breath. And we did do the last pose in yoga, which is called Shavasana, which is when you lie on your back for, generally speaking, at least 10 minutes, and you just kind of relax. And this was completely foreign to most of us. And I would say all of the boys generally fell asleep during this time. In our early 20s, we were staying up very late and doing lots of studies and lots of playing. And this yoga class was at 8:30 in the morning, which was very early for theater people. So I kind of started to use yoga as a way to prepare before going on stage. It was a great way for me to calm down because of the breath and the movement. And it was also a really wonderful way to open up my body and feel that the voice is incredibly important when you're on stage. So I found that it was a great way to kind of add to the warm-up voice exercises that I used to do before going on stage. And so, but I didn't know much more about it. I just thought it was a great warm-up. And then years after I graduated, I started running. I ended up at my highest, I ended up running about 8 miles a day, which was a lot. Wow. And my body was suffering from that. I go, oh, you know what? I should go back to that yoga thing. And I've heard, it was really good for my body. And I know, and I've seen that it's really stretchy and it should be very good for my body. So I went into the yoga class, and I guess from then on, the rest is history, because I started to see how powerful the actual practice was, because these were yoga teachers teaching proper yoga with the names and all that stuff. And I found that the practice itself completely changed the way that I moved in the world. I was able to deal with stress a lot better, my anxiety, a level of kind of depression that I was sort of going through during that time, because I was doing the acting thing in Hollywood for a while, and that is an incredibly defeating thing to do. It's torturous, and it was making me a very unhappy person. And yoga helped me cope with a lot of that in a very subconscious way. So the reason that I was sold on it is because it started to act on my psyche and my body before I even knew what was happening. Meaning that it's not something that the teacher said, like, if you do this, you will experience X, Y, and Z. My teacher, the first one that I went to, was very just like, you would just go into class and you would just practice the poses, and he would help you to breathe, but he never gave you any philosophy. He invited you to step a little deeper, but that was about it. And I found that I started to crave more. Like, I started to do a lot of research about why I was feeling so much better. And I found out that there is a method to this incredible madness that has been around for over 5,000 years. So I fell in love with it and decided to do it full time.
Awesome. That's a great story.
Yeah,
I've listened to most of your feed podcasts. I mean, I've probably listened to those a couple of times each, but I didn't realize that you had an acting history. So this show is partly about people facing their fear, I guess, regardless of what walk of life they're in. And I'm sure that theatre acting, particularly with the trust in your voice and your body, would have led to a lot of fear. So was that?
Oh yeah,
that was that
absolutely.
early realization that maybe yoga had some kind of ancient power, for the lack of a better term, being 5,000 years old, and you weren't even quite sure what that was. Moving
Oh,
forward
yeah.
now, just for the listener, and maybe they're looking for something maybe more concrete out of your yoga history, what was it that you first thought, okay, I feel like something's really happening, but when did you see it really manifest in the physical world? Was it definitely just a physical feeling in your body, or was it an overall feeling of well-being? Was there one moment maybe you can pinpoint where you're like, okay, it's absolutely yoga that's making me feel this way?
You know what? I'm not sure if there's a pinpoint moment, but I can tell you that when I was working in Hollywood, of course, I was working at a restaurant serving tables, which is obviously every person that serves tables in Hollywood is generally an actor. So we have to deal with a lot of awfulness because working in the service industry, I'm not sure if you ever have, it's really a challenge. I think that this is totally has nothing to do with anything, but I think anybody who needs to kind of learn how to be in the world needs to be at some point in the service industry because it makes you have to do things at times and be the best person that you can be in situations that are just awful. People sometimes are really awful to you. So under that high stress situation of having to deal with so many different personalities coming at you, I started to really behave nastily. It was bringing the worst out of me. I was very impatient, losing my temper a lot, snapping, stuff like that. And it was during that time that I started to really focus on my practice. So I started to get more and more into the yoga and just practice while I was not doing anything else, right? So it was like if I wasn't auditioning, if I wasn't at the restaurant, I was taking some sort of yoga class. And I started to see in the process that whether I wanted to or not, when I was in the restaurant, my behavior started to shift. Things weren't affecting me as much anymore. I was not reactive. I was not at least as reactive as I had been. And I also started to notice that things didn't stick with me as long. So there were times when I would go into work and then I would come back home and I would just have this I would keep that energy with me, and I was more angry. It took a lot of time to sort of like unwind from these days, and I started to find that as I continued to practice, and that's the only thing that changed. I started to think, "Wow, I'm kind of becoming a better person," you know,
Yeah.
and so I started to find a way to calm down, to be able to use my breath. And that's the first book that I ever bought after I started to find this kind of connection that I felt was due to yoga. I started to, like I said, study a little more on my end, not like taking anything at studios, but I bought a book called The Breathing Book by Donna Farhi. And that book is very simple, but it broke down so much about your breath that it blew my mind. Like there were things in that book that I had never thought about before. Not necessarily like esoteric things, but very just an anatomy and the way physiology, the way the breath works inside of your body, that it just blew my mind. Plus other observations about culture and the way that generally speaking, culture imparts certain breathing patterns and what breathing patterns you have when you are in an emotional situation, like when you're angry or when you're sad, the way that society kind of imparts tighter clothes on women and the way that women tend to, and perhaps some men as well, tend to hold their bellies in because you don't want their stomach to hang out. And like, the stomach, it has to be flat. And so you kind of hold your belly into the spine and how that is detrimental to your breathing patterns and how it affects the rest of your body. I mean, there was so much information that I had never heard before. And I started to become much more aware of it and began to do some of the simple practices in that book. She's got a lot of really simple things in there that are very easy to do. And I began to see a difference. I began to observe my breath. I began to notice when I held my breath. I began to notice the way my breath changed. I began to notice how if I was very upset about being, angry or sad, what would happen if I worked with my breath? What about when I was happy? What did my breath feel like? So there was lots of tools that I learned just from that book, which made me want to know more about the practice itself, about how to incorporate the breath in the movement. And it also showed me how beneficial this would be to many other people. And so my first interest in the yoga wasn't necessarily about the physical. It was about this that I had felt, how I go, wow, this could be so helpful to so many people that are having a hard time with anxiety or a hard time with being depressed or, suffering from a place of being like that you would feel like you don't fit in. And also people who are in pain. So there.
Thanks for all the detail there. That was great.
It's crazy stuff.
Yeah. Just to maybe now fast forward to the present, just want to fill the listener in on maybe everything that you have going with yoga now. Apologies if I stuffed up earlier. You do have your own practice, is that right? Or is it all online now? Or is it more just educational stuff that you do through your websites?
I generally do most of what I teach via the websites. I do have a physical practice that I have, but I do not own a studio. I sort of have chosen not to have a permanent space because for me, running the business of yoga is something that at this moment I do not want to do. So I work personally with people. I do privates and I do a couple of public classes, but at this moment, I am a full-time mom first and foremost. So I'm with my girls a lot. And at this moment in time, it's not the optimal choice for me to leave them for, because each class is 90 minutes and travel to and fro could be between 2 hours to 2 hours and 15 minutes. And it doesn't add up. The time that it takes for me to leave and get a sitter or have, somebody help out is a little bit of a challenge. So I do have just two. And I have loyal students from, when I was in Los Angeles, I did teach a full-time class. I taught full-time, like for 13 to 15 classes a week, which was a lot. And so right now I keep it very personal, very one-on-one. And my teachings now are moving away from the physical practice into the application of yoga into the everyday life, into the situations it's funny now that I'm talking about that. It's taking me full circle from how I began. I'm now taking the depth of the practice in terms of the body, the mind, the philosophy, and everything that I've been doing now since when I started studying it seriously, it was about 1999. So I've been studying yoga in depth for that long. And I'm coming back to making sure that people know that yoga is not going to the yoga studio, but applying those principles to the everydayness, like the way that you're dealing with things that come up in your life, how to apply what you've learned on the mat and take it to where you are now to help you be a better person, basically, at its essence.
That's great. Just to maybe really lock it down for someone who, like myself, who has thought about yoga in the past, and it wasn't the first thing that I thought about because I'm not the most anxious person. I'm quite stoic, I guess, by nature, but there have been times lately I have been unwell on and off for about 9 weeks where I've actually been suffering from more anxiety than what I normally would. And I've thought maybe yoga would be an option. Is there generally a few things where you as a long-term yoga practitioner can look at someone's physical body or maybe the way they're carrying themselves emotionally and actually make a judgment to yourself, not being judgmental, but do you think, wow, maybe yoga could really help that person? Maybe they're stiff or they're lacking flexibility or they seem a little bit emotionally all over the place. Is that something where, as a yoga teacher, you're probably more aware of, just the state of other people, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, that was a long-winded question, but
No, but I absolutely, it's really interesting because it's something that's very intuitive to me. It's not something that I think about and it's not something that I'm like, woohoo, it's very woo-woo. It's just it's incredibly analytical, actually. As soon as somebody comes into me, I immediately get a hit of what they need. Like immediately I know, oh my God, this person's shoulders are super tight. And it's not judgmental, and it's not, like I said, it's nothing like some sort of woo-woo thing where you don't know where this knowledge is coming from. It just is because of the fact that I've been dealing with bodies for so long. And I do my best in my teaching to guide somebody to step deeper. And that's what's one of the hardest things about being a yoga teacher, or at least somebody who works with bodies in this way, is that you cannot especially when it's something deeper, whether it's a physical ailment that somebody's dealing with or an emotional ailment or something along those lines that's blocking them. As a teacher, you offer the teachings, and I make sure that I speak them in different ways so that it gets to you. So there are some people who really align with the philosophy, that really align with the esoteric quality of things, and I can talk in myths, and I can talk in, yoga jargon, which might not resonate with some people. I also speak the language of the non-yogi, if you will, where I can bring awareness to certain parts of your body, making you using the language that you're used to. So it's very much about just analytical ways of introducing you to your body and using words that are really like comfortable to you so that you will understand what I'm talking about. I really love to use metaphors and similes so that people understand that from their everyday lives, like the way that let's say if I say to you, your side body is from the top of your hip all the way up to your armpits. That's your side body. And generally, people's side body is very short, meaning that it's very pulled downward towards the earth. And that kind of inhibits the ability for your breath to come inside of your body. So whenever I say that to somebody, they'll be like, what is that? How do you, and then if I say, make your side body long, people are going to go, what the heck is that, right? I don't even know how to do that. So if I say to somebody, how about this? Imagine that you're walking into like a little bit of cold water, right? And you start to walk in, and then the water starts to go up towards your belly, and then it starts to go up and it's a little bit colder. Do you know how you start to lengthen your spine a little bit and your armpits kind of go up a little bit there? Your shoulders kind of move up, sort of like, oh my gosh, the water's coming. That's elongating your side body. So you feel how long you get? So that everybody has something that they've gone through like that. It's easier for me to talk that way than it is for me to just say, lengthen your side body, make your side body really long, right? It's like, what is that? And then once you start to get it, then I can use that specific language to get you to move into that space. So yeah, and I do get, I have one of my clients is the CEO of a company, and he really does live in a state of, I guess, stress, right? But he's very much of a go-getter. He's really strong, and he really, he knows how to work with his mind. But he notices now, I've brought it to his attention how much it's affecting his body, because he came to me really just with belly issues, like he had an issue with his digestion, and we've just been working on his body to open up that part of his belly. And he started to find so much more about his body in our practice together. And it's really shifted his life. Like, he says it to me all the time. And all I can say is, I know. I know. And it's great to see that, because he's not like what you would imagine to be a yogi. Like, he doesn't, he's not like chanting Om and, knows the names of the poses. We do very simple stretches, very simple stuff. And he comes in, and I immediately read what he needs, and I talk with him about what he needs, and we work on what he needs at that time. He'll come and go like, oh, I'm really tight in my body. I feel like my brain's not stopping. Okay, I can do a practice with that. Or I feel incredibly tired. My body feels really strong, but I feel so tired, like I could fall asleep. Okay, we can work with that. So every time he comes in, I just offer him more, and then I apply the teachings to what's going on at work. So I help him deal with high stress situations in his job, conversations that he's having, so that he now starts to apply what we learned in class to those high stress situations. And so he's able to start to shift and understand, oh my gosh, my neck is tightening right now. Oh my God, I stopped breathing. And those are really huge realizations for him. And it's really shifted.
That's awesome. I think that I'm probably very much along lines with that particular gentleman. So,
no,
depending on, I think that it's interesting that you brought up one particular point in there, and that's that you've learnt over time to, and I'm sure that your podcasting has probably helped as well with that, over being a long-term podcaster, to manipulate your language to the audience that you're dealing with. And it's funny that came up in today's episode, because we're going completely off the cuff. So I was actually going to bring some academics and experts in the future about language onto the show, about how different people require different kinds of language to instigate a change of habit or a change of lifestyle choice. Because I'm sure that if you were to come to me, and although I'm probably slightly more open-minded than the average Aussie, if it was too esoteric for me, I would probably not jump on something like that. Whereas if it was more structured and analytical, and you were speaking that kind of language, like the elongated body thing and making your body longer and all, that's the kind of language that would appeal to someone like me, and I'm sure a lot of other people. So, I mean, that's a complete tangent, but it's just interesting that you've found that experience too, as I have over the last couple of years teaching musicians, and now with the new show, that changing your language actually is really important when you're trying to help someone make a habit change. I just thought I'd throw that in there, but
no, that's a really great observation. And I think that's one of my strengths, that I've always been able to find a way. And I think that, it's balanced between, the acting thing and, having to, like whenever I was acting, one of the first cues or the first teachings that I got as an actor was the fact that I would, one of the things in terms of saying what we're saying, if we're working on a scene, was always, how do you want to make the other person feel? What do you want to make them feel? And that was something that we had to actively do, whether we were doing it via the words, because we had specific words to say. It's not like I could change the words, but I had to embody the action in my entire body to be able to get that across. So even if I was saying yes, if I was trying to make them feel no, I had to embody a different way. So I use all of me. I use my language. I use the tones in my voice. When I'm doing podcasting or when I'm working with audio, I know how to manipulate my voice to sound specifically in specific ways, to make key points, to use the cadence of my voice, or to even go up and down on sentences, or try to have pauses or things like that. I use it as an art form to create an experience with somebody. And whenever you work with me personally, if you work with me physically in this way, I do the same thing. So there are times when there are some people who are a lot more visual. So I have to embody what I'm asking. So if I'm saying, and I'm going back to the side body long thing, if I were to say side body long, you will see me do side body long. So you will see my body move in that way. And I will exaggerate it so that you will see, oh, it makes sense, right, when I'm moving in that way. And that's something that I was taught as a yoga teacher first, is that first you embody the teachings. It's one of the biggest things that you can do as a yoga teacher, is that you embody what you're doing with the vibrancy of your presence. And that gets it across. Because if you go up in front of a class and you're like talking like this, everybody take your arms up, it's like, what the heck? And so my classes are energizing, and I play it, it's like, it's energizing here, and you touch the sky and you do this, and then I take you down. So I use my voice and my physical energy in my body so that I can get you to do what you need to do. And it's funny, I was just talking to my students the last class we had together. There are times when I will do things when I, stretch my arm out and I wiggle my fingers to sort of like make it seem like my arms are getting longer. And I'll just say, like, extend out through your arms and through your fingertips, and I'll wiggle my fingers just as a way to show it, right? And it's funny because they see that and then they wiggle their fingers, and I'm like, and it's amazing how much like the lack of thinking affects when you are working with the body, and when you have somebody do something. It's like Simon says, right? You'll just do it. So sometimes that part of it comes into play as well. So the language that you use is absolutely important. But when you're working, at least for me, physically with somebody, the language of the body and the language of the energy that you exude is just as important. Because as a teacher, I have to have a much more stronger energy than the person that's coming to see me. I have to hold space for them to feel both safe to open up and supported to do whatever they need to do. So I can't be shaky. I can't be doubtful. I have to be like a rock, like solid ground. So if I have somebody that's coming to me when they're really stressed out or very anxious or tired or in pain, because I see a lot of people in pain, I have to be able to provide a space of safety for them. And I know that that sounds a little bit like a little esoteric, but it really is about the way, I don't know if you've ever walked into a room or you ever met somebody that as soon as you saw them, or as soon as you hugged them, or as soon as you entered a specific room, you automatically feel like, oh gosh, okay, I can exhale, right? And then the opposite is the same. Sometimes you'll walk into a room or you'll meet somebody where they're like, you just immediately start to feel anxious, and you're like, what the? Like, you just feel that this is not conducive to like meetings at work or something like that, you know? So you can start to sense that. So I have to work on that. So I provide like a blank canvas for somebody to come in and have their experience, not the one that I want to give them, but their experience.
So I thought that would be a great place to end today's episode, being the end of part 1 of my chat with Elsie. Just such a powerful way to finish an episode. I thought it was a great place to do that. So for today's show notes, braverbytheday.com/21. That's braverbytheday.com/21. And stay tuned for the next episode, because I'll be finishing off my chat with Elsie and we broaden out the topic out a little bit beyond yoga, dive in a little bit more on things like podcasting and things like that. So really excited about that. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And finally, thank you again to Audible for sponsoring this episode. If you wanted to get Do the Work by Stephen Pressfield, 100% risk-free, go to audibletrial.com/Australia for that. Thank you for sticking around for the episode. Thank you so much to Elsie, and I'll see you guys in part 2.